Okay, and we're on. Thank you, Nims, for being here to talk about, to talk about transactional analysis and its concepts and some of its resources and tools. And then we'll do another video where we talk about how you use TA in what it is that you do. So I was lucky enough to work with Nims before in organizational development, and Nims was always very helpful in providing me very useful feedback on some of the projects that I was working on. So it was a pleasure. Nims, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So hi everybody, I'm Nims. I am a organizational development and design practitioner. I'm currently working at the MOD, and I met Patricia in our last company. I'm also a coach and completed my diploma in coaching, and I'm also a trainee transactional analyst in the field of organizations.
Excellent, yeah. And you've been working in OD for a number of years.
Probably the last 3 to 4 years.
Okay. Prior to that, you were?
Prior to that, I was working in regular HR jobs, so predominantly in recruitment, early careers recruitment. And one of the things that I was fascinated by was why people choose to work in certain organizations or in certain roles, and why do they work better with some people or some teams, and why do they prefer certain aspects of their work. So a lot of the why is kind of what led me to kind of pursue transactional analysis.
And now you have your own company. So there are, do you want to talk into that?
Sure. So I run a freelance company, and I offer one-to-one coaching or team coaching, also certified in certain elements of psychometrics, just kind of Hogan and Lumina, and I provide OD interventions, whether that's kind of more of a team intervention or intact teams or teams coming together, or actually looking at your organization as a whole and thinking about what is the narrative of the organization, and is it supporting the strategy and the goals that it has.
Okay, great. Yeah. And of course, because you've worked in organizations that whole time, Nims has a good understanding of organizations, what really leaders want to see in terms of the culture, in terms of the organization, and what employees want to see as well. Today we're going to talk about transactional analysis because I met with Nims a little while ago during December, and she was telling me I'd just done a transactional analysis 101 course, and I was super amazed by it all. And then Nims was telling me around some of the application of this that she uses in her work, and I thought this is absolutely fascinating stuff. I think because a lot of it is very innovative and new in that space, like a new language almost. But I'm going to leave it to Nims to tell us what the basis of transactional analysis is, and then maybe some tools or concepts around that.
Okay. So typically when people ask me what is TA, I would describe TA as a humanistic approach in personal and professional development. Also a theory of how we begin to communicate and relate to each other, and that could be people you have relationships with, situations you find yourselves in, and your relationship with yourself. So it's very much of a humanistic approach about how people have come to be. So some people also liken it to a theory of personality.
Excellent, yeah. Because it can be used alongside a lot of the psychotherapeutic approaches.
And this would you would classify TA as very much of a psychotherapeutic approach, and you might notice even if you've done some significant coaching training, there are aspects of TA that underpin that. So one of the fundamental beliefs around TA is that everyone is okay, and so the okayness is a piece where people have heard about whether I'm okay, you're not okay, that book, and actually how people believe that they are, or they feel I'm not okay and everyone else is, or I'm okay and you're not okay. And so there is a fundamental piece around actually okayness, which I believe is kind of valuing yourself and self-acceptance, but also valuing other people, and how they are. So kind of the mutuality and the experience that we have together.
Yeah, when I was doing that, it was so interesting because it was really around, I've never actually consciously had to think about what it is that I feel about myself versus others. But that was just such an enlightening exercise. Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting about actually what beliefs you hold about yourself and then other people, and actually how does then that fit in, looking at the one of the models that you have is the OK Corral, which is a kind of like a 2x2 with four boxes, and it's got I'm okay, you're okay, which is kind of where we want to get to. And then the other boxes, which are less helpful, which is I'm okay, you're not okay, or I'm not okay, you're not okay, and you're okay and I'm not okay. And so actually what tends to happen is we might move around in some of those boxes depending on who we are, who we're with, other situations we find ourselves in.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, there's I was given the book by Eric Byrne, The Games People Can Play, ages ago. I didn't really understand because it was written quite a long time ago, but the workshop really made it come alive, and it was also talking about the transactions between kind of adult, parent, child, and what that looks like. So yeah, could you tell us how you got into it? Maybe Eric Byrne, what that means to you, and some of the concepts that I'm talking about.
Sure. So Eric Byrne was the founder of this branch of psychology, which is TA, and it was very much kind of his movement, and it has obviously significantly grown since he first developed it in the 50s and 60s. In terms of how I came across it in my coach training, where they taught the model of parent, adult, and child. And actually, when I talk to other people about this model, they're like, "Oh yes, this was this was a piece of theory that I did with my management course in the 90s." And so I've noticed that TA has been integrated in kind of leadership theories, leadership type work, management theory, management training. So it's a concept a lot of people are familiar with. And in essence, what it is that it's about using our three modalities, which is parent, adult, and child, or three probably ego states is what they call them. And they're drawn like little snowmen, so three circles on top of each other vertically. And what the theory says is that we are kind of using all three, or some, or predominantly one, or depending on where we are throughout our day. So in the morning when we wake up, we might think about, what is our experience of ourselves, who are we, our identity, etc. So we might wake up and think about that. And some of the aspects, for example, of a child ego state would be when you see children growing up and playing. And you get, children as they grow up, when they're about 3 or 4, they learn to communicate, they learn to adapt to society norms. So it's no longer about playing and taking your clothes off, because that's not how we do things in society. And so they call that aspect the adapted child, and that's within the child ego state. And then you have another piece of the child ego state, which is about doing all that, being a free child, running around, having fun, playing. But when you look at the child ego state, although those aspects are really, really good, there are also kind of the extremes on the other end, where you can either become over adapted and too compliant, or you could actually completely go the other way and totally rebel. And so you would call that your rebellious child. And with the free child, you have the the risk of going too far and becoming selfish, or actually quite reckless.
Great. Yeah, you can see that in children.
Yes, you can see that in children, and I would probably say that the nuances in the child ego state, I think what they call it is the, I can never remember this, is for either the functional or the structural model, the proper name for it. But the same is quite similar to the parental ego state, the parent ego state, where you get one side which is very critical, judgmental, can be condescending, and the other aspect which is what they might call as the nurturing parent. But again, that's got two shades to it. One which is being empathetic and nurturing and looking after and caring. Actually, when you take that to the extreme, that could be seen as maybe smothering or what they call marshmallowing. It takes away responsibility. So it might be like a boy who might be 10 and the mother feeding him his dinner. And so it's not letting the child develop their own sense of responsibility. And then you might get on the other side, a manager who could be judgmental or very critical to its employees. You might see some of those modalities in leadership. And so, for example, in the negative side of a nurturing parent, you might get a manager who absolutely cares for their team, wants them to do well, but probably not giving them the responsibility or letting them grow.
Okay. And so what is the goal of this for
TA?
All of this transaction? Yeah.
I guess the fundamental goal in TA is autonomy. And autonomy is about incorporating your thinking, feeling, and doing, your thinking, feeling, and behaviors, and making choices in awareness in the here and now, which means looking at the situation, understanding about what it needs, understanding your own needs, and then making the most appropriate decision or intervention. And actually, when you talk about doing things like that on an ongoing basis, every single day, looking at things with fresh eyes, thinking about what's really needed here, that could be an exhausting activity, take up a lot of brain power, and actually being in your adult, or as I like to call it, your integrated adult, because what we want to do is we want to take the positives from the parent ego state and the child ego state. So you absolutely want to be cooperative, you want to have some creativity and be free from the child ego states, but you also want some structure and some empathy and some caring. So we like to bring all those pieces into the adult ego state. And the adult ego state is primarily known as kind of where the processing of the information happens. So we need to incorporate all those pieces. So where I study co-creative TA, they call that the integrated adult.
Okay, great. So it would then be maybe these unconscious processes that you're actively making conscious, and that you're actively then trying to become autonomous around.
Yeah, so a lot of this might be that, for example, you might have a pattern in your life or certain decisions that you've made, and that always land you in the same situation. But because this is what you've always known, doing something different is unheard of, because this is your frame of reference or your choices that you've made, which has been limited. And sometimes actually stepping out of that, becoming aware that this is what I'm doing all the time and it's not helping me, and stepping out of that and choosing to do something very different could mean that they then get a different result. And so it's about noticing where you're ending up, or your own decisions or your own patterns, and then thinking about what is it that I want to do differently here and now that's going to enable me to get a different result. And actually that is a scary prospect.
Yeah, I mean, because there's a lot of agency implied in the model, because as a critical parent, you can then engender the same types of behaviors with say, if you're a manager with a team that you're leading.
Absolutely. So you can't, because people, that's how we begin to shape ourselves, right? So when you look at the parent ego state, what you notice inside that is messages, or this is how we do things. So, when we might be going to school, we all know that we sit at the table and wait for the learning to be given to us. And you might find actually when you go into, you know, you're out of school, you're at work, they send you on a course, and you might slip into that very same behavior about, I'm sitting here and the learning is going to come to me, rather than thinking, hey, what is it that I want to learn today, and how can I get my needs met, or make sure that the course delivers what I want. And we don't typically operate like that, because that's not what we've learned about our schooling system. And the same could be said of management. So if we've got a structure or a piece where the managers are actually really critical, yeah, that would definitely seep down in the system, because that's what's being rewarded up the system, and that's what they're learning about. This is how we lead or manage, and yeah, you would get, those would be created.
I feel like when you're talking about the humanistic developmental piece, you're really talking about whole system, whole individuals. So the thinking, feeling, soul, body, mind, spirit piece, and then you're also talking about a developmental process, because you go through it. You're not only developmentally, you go through child and adult and parent. You learn those traits from others as well, and you might then have recurring patterns around what you exhibit and when.
Yes, because we are essentially, when we're born, obviously a blank slate, and then we begin to take in bits and pieces of information or stories or narratives, and we make them our own. And sometimes we have choices about what we take. And so I think historically the model has been that, you know, whatever our parents give us, we take, but actually we have agency and choice within us. So there are certain decisions, perhaps when I was growing up, that I said, no, this is not going to be me. And other people have made different decisions. So yes, absolutely, when you're growing up, you begin to actually take in these messages, these stories, and actually frame up your narrative.
So interesting. In terms of the other TA tools, are there many tools? Are there many resources that people can access?
There are a significant amount of tools. So one of my kind of key favorite tools would be, I like the ego state model, which we just talked about, the parent, adult, and child. Surprisingly, I kind of introduced the OK corral, and I don't use that much. But what I do use is the notion of strokes. And strokes is a social unit of recognition. And strokes could be really positive, and they could be negative as well. And so a positive stroke would be a piece of positive feedback or an affirmation that makes you feel really good. And a negative stroke would be something that could be hurtful, or would leave the person not feeling very nice at the end. So one of the things that is interesting to look at is the strokes that we give people. Are they positive or are they negative? And what's the underlying message? And so what I find really fascinating is when you look at the transactions, which is basically how we begin to talk and relate to each other. You know, is it child to child, where you see two children playing? Is it parent to parent, which is the conversations that mums or dads have outside the school gates when they're talking? Or is it adult to adult, which is probably what we're doing here? But what's more interesting to notice is that we might be having an adult to adult conversation, but the psychological message could be very different. And it could be, I know better than you, Patricia, and that might be parent to child. So it might look okay, but the sense and the feeling could be very different. And that is something to be really, really mindful of. So the nuances, the kind of the undertone and the undercurrent of language and intent and meaning is really important to capture.
Yeah, and I mean that's really tricky, because it feels like that one aspect of that is only through self-reflection could that be done, but then presumably also through observation.
Yes, so absolutely right. So how am I feeling at the end of this conversation is a good way of looking at that. And yes, what are your observations? What are you noticing? What is the language? What is the sense that you're picking up from this person? What is the tone? All of those are really important. And the other piece that I really enjoy in terms of TA tools would be what they call the working styles or drivers. And working styles are typically known as, and I probably will forget one, but I'll name them all, which is please people. So these are this is the piece around I want to make sure that you're okay and you feel good and you have all your needs met, but it doesn't matter about me because it's all about you. There's be strong. So these people are typically kind of resilient, good in a crisis, and don't talk about their feelings. They're well defended. You get hurry up, which is someone who likes to do things really, really quickly. And these are people who will notice are always late, moving from one meeting to another, or they talk really fast. There's try hard, which is someone who is really super enthusiastic and has lots of things on the go. And they probably have lots of books, but they haven't read them, but they might have read like the first couple of pages, something that I do. And what else is there? I'm missing something. Be perfect. So someone who's super conscientious, takes their time over their work to make sure it's 100% right. So they're driven by perfection.
Wow, yeah, that's so interesting because when you were talking about that, I was noticing, yeah, yes. There are ways of behaving that are so that I am aware of, and also I think that is a societal issue, maybe.
It is, and what you might notice is that there are maybe some of these that we begin to develop or have developed when we were growing up, and has shaped kind of who we are. And so, you know, I would see kind of maybe lots of men in the Be Strong, because when they were younger, maybe the type of messages that they received was, you know, boys don't cry, for example, we don't show emotion. And maybe in some certain cultures, for us, you know, females of the Asian community, a lot of us is about pleasing people, looking after your family, looking after other people, but obviously sacrificing your own needs. And so, yeah, it largely depends culturally, actually, what is accepted, what's the normal, what gets rewarded. And certainly kind of some of the messages that you get. But it's fascinating when you begin to look at the drivers or the working styles through the lens of an organization, and when you begin to kind of see how they interact. So can you imagine someone who is going to someone who's a please people and someone who's a be strong? They will definitely not get along. Neither would a hurry up or a try hard versus a be perfect, because the hurry up person will want to get the work done, but the be perfect will want to make sure that their work is perfect. And so it's interesting when you kind of you can definitely see some of these working styles play out, and actually which ones play well with each other and which ones don't.
Yeah, I think the language that I know a lot of people have been talking about are like, you know, archetypes and triggers that you can find with yourself and with other people in the team, right? So yeah, it's so very interesting that, and it sounds like transactional analysis, of course, those kinds of working styles would potentially change with the way in which the generations change, maybe.
Yeah, they might do. A lot of them will depend on what I would say are cultural elements, absolutely. So culture plays a huge part in it, and so does actually kind of how you grow up, or what gets rewarded. This goes back to the strokes. You know, do you get rewarded for doing absolutely perfect work, or do you get rewarded for being nice to people? Do you get rewarded for not showing your emotions? And so as you begin to grow up and we seek, you know, positive strokes, that then begins to reinforce our patterns of behavior about, if I'm like this, then I know I'll get really positive strokes. And one of the things is actually, I think working styles is really good, but when you begin to then move from having a useful working style into actually applying it far too much to the extreme, and then it becomes really unhelpful to you.
Yeah, that's a lot of the therapies that I've encountered do mention that these are natural ways of behaving, but when it becomes dysfunctional and you're missing, or maybe you're encountering too much aggression, too much tension, you're not eating, potentially you're not sleeping, the issues with your health, then that's an indication that potentially something is being done to an extreme, or dysfunctionally.
Yeah, also to the point that actually some of these behaviors might not longer be serving you or the type of work that you're doing. And so I would classify myself as someone who is definitely in the try hard area. And so if you're going to give me a big long project to do, chances are that I'm going to flag, towards the end of it. So project delivery is not my strength. And so what I need is a role where I could do some consulting, be creative with my clients, kind of work on the spot and try lots of things and have variety in my role rather than kind of doing the big long pieces. And so it's about what is it that really works for you in the situation, and what roles or what organizations are going to work really, really well for you.
Yeah. And so people can do this through potentially coming to coaching with you.
Certainly they can find out. They can certainly find out kind of through kind of some basic questioning. And I think there are some resources that I'll post about actually learning about what your working styles are. And I find when I've done some kind of basic reading that the Big Five personality, right, you can certainly see some correlations there. So someone who's a try-hard is definitely someone who's a big picture thinker. Someone who's a be perfect is very conscientious. Someone who's a please people would be someone who's agreeable. So you can see the links in so if you take a traditional personality questionnaire, you will definitely be able to see kind of some of your behaviors right there.
Very interesting. Yeah. And if people find a transactional analysis course around, I'm not sure if they do them in the UK. You're in the UK. They do them.
I am in the UK.
Yeah.
So my recommendation would be, if you're interested in TA learning the tools, kind of what it is and how it could help, a TA 101, which is what you mentioned, is really useful, which will give you a kind of a really broad view of kind of all the TA tools. It's a 2-day, I think it's a 2-day workshop typically, and yeah, really light touch, but lots of content.
Awesome. Okay. We'll post this all in the comment section when we post the video, and we are looking to do another one with Nims that's all around the application of transactional analysis. So look out for that video next. But I just want to say thank you so much, Nims, for that amazing explanation. And if people want to get in touch with you, then they can also go to your website. We'll keep your contacts below the video as well.
Yeah, I'll make sure I'll include them as well as some other useful resources.
Excellent. Great. Thank you.